Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into the misty Scottish Highlands, where the grass stays damp, the air smells like peat smoke and old wool, and villagers once gathered, not for war, or worship, or whiskey tasting, but to chase wheels of cheese down steep, unforgiving hills. Picture it, you're bundled in layers of scratchy tweed, your boots barely gripping the slick slope, and all around you, a crowd of cheering neighbors watches as a lump of semi-fermented dairy escapes gravity and tumbles wildly into legend. This isn't just a sport. This is cheese rolling, Highland style. And you probably won't survive this hill without rolling your ankle, your pride, or both. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of the village. Behind you, a patchwork of low stone cottages, their chimneys puffing sleepily into the overcast sky. Ahead the hill, let's just call it the hill, because everyone knows which one you mean. It's the lump of land where knees go to die and cheeses go to fly. Wet moss clings to the slope, sheep tracks zigzag across it like ancient battle maps, and at the very top, a rickety wooden cart holds this year's offering, a round, bandaged cheddar locals call Dooney. No one remembers exactly why this tradition began. Some say it was to celebrate spring, others swear it was an ancient fertility rite gone wrong. Historians still argue whether the origins were pre-Christian rituals tied to Beltane, or just something the villagers invented because they were bored and had too much dairy lying around. Either way, it's happening again tonight. You trudge forward, the drizzle dampening your sleeves. A boy runs past shouting, "It's startin'! They've lit the butter torch!" Which, as it turns out, is exactly what it sounds like, a fat-soaked rag stuck on a stick, meant to bless the cheese by holding it near the flame just long enough to make it sweat slightly. The whole thing smells faintly of toast and smoke and mischief. Villagers begin gathering, some carrying baskets, others bottles. Children run in tight circles, trying to guess how far the cheese will fly this year. An old woman mutters a rhyme under her breath about cheese that rolls far, brings no war. You don't ask. You just nod. A man in an oversized woolen cloak claps you on the back. "First time, he asks with a smile that's missing 2 teeth and probably gained 3 stories. You admit it is. He nods solemnly, then gestures at the hill. "Don't lean too far forward. Cheese outpace your knees, and next thing you know, your face'll be in a gorse bush." You believe him. Mostly because his beard is still full of gorse thorns. There's a tension now in the air, a giddy sense of shared madness. This isn't just a sport, it's theater, played out in mud and bruises, with no winners, only survivors. The cheese sits at the ready, painted with a faded thistle emblem and tied in string to keep it from splitting open too soon. A rooster crows. This isn't symbolic, it's just an enthusiastic bird someone forgot to pen up. But it triggers the official beginning of the event. The piper steps forward next, dressed in dark tartan, his breath fogging the reed of his bagpipe. He plays a slow, meandering tune known locally as the Lament of the Lost Brie. No one remembers the full lyrics, but the melody makes the hair on your arms stand up, even through the wool. People sway. One girl places a sprig of heather behind your ear. "For balance," she whispers. You're not sure if it's a blessing or a prank, but you thank her anyway. Then comes the countdown. Not shouted, but hummed. Everyone hums down from 10 together, low and rhythmic, like bees gathering before a storm. The cheese is placed gently on its edge. A local lad with an unfortunate mustache gives it a soft push. And it's off. The wheel of cheese bounces, wobbles, skids, and then commits fully to its descent. It begins gaining speed almost immediately, flinging chunks of damp grass in its wake. You, and a dozen other brave or foolish souls, take off after it. The hill is steeper than it looked. Your legs flail, your breath catches, and somewhere nearby, someone yells, "Catch the wee beastie!" as if the cheese might suddenly sprout legs and flee. Your boots slip. You recover. Then you slip again, landing softly on your side, which is marginally better than the alternative, a full-body tumble that ends in a ditch full of frogs and bad decisions. As you lie there, blinking up at the gray sky, someone runs past screaming triumphantly, holding what looks like the cheese, but is actually a round loaf of oat bread, launched from another village in protest. Classic. The crowd roars. Not because someone won, no one ever really wins, but because the cheese has reached the bottom intact, a feat only slightly less rare than a sunny Highland summer. You make your way down slowly, dignity left somewhere around the thistle patch. Villagers clap you on the shoulder, hand you a mug of something warm and slightly questionable, and talk excitedly about the next round. Apparently, they roll multiple cheeses per night, each one with a slightly different name and legend. You overhear one man claiming that last year's cheese rolled so far, it crossed into another parish and caused a mild diplomatic incident. Another swears the 1724 wheel contained a coin for luck, and was never seen again. A third simply sighs and mutters, "Aye, but the 1783 cheddar, now that was a cheese worth chasing." More on that soon. For now you settle on a low stone wall, steam rising from your cup, sheep bleating distantly, and the sky darkening into a velvety charcoal. The next cheese is being blessed with a quick spin around the fire, and a sprinkle of dried herbs. No one agrees what kind. Doesn't matter. It's all part of the magic. And whether you're here to win, to watch, or just to wonder why anyone thought flinging dairy down a cliff was a good idea, one thing's clear. You're not leaving until the cheese runs out. The cheese itself deserves a little respect. Sure, from a distance, it looks like a humble wheel of dairy, pale, bandaged in muslin, maybe a little lopsided. But up close, it has a presence. You approach the wooden cart where tonight's next cheese, affectionately named We Crumble, rests on a bed of hay. It's slightly warm, from the fire nearby, and smells faintly of sharp cream and a hint of something nutty. This isn't just food. This is an athlete. A local legend. A would-be missile. Scottish cheese, you quickly learn, was not always the rubbery afterthought it's sometimes painted as. Back in the 17th and 18th centuries, rural cheese-making was a serious business. Each village had its own favored recipe, passed down through families like battle tactics. Some preferred sheep's milk, others swore by goats. A few particularly rebellious hamlets even used thistle rennet, just to be different. And in places like this, where the land was poor but the traditions were rich, cheese became more than sustenance. It became identity. And competition. The cheese chosen for a roll wasn't just any old wheel pulled from a cellar. It had to be firm, aged just right, dense enough to roll, soft enough to survive a few spectacular bounces. Local lore claims that the winning cheese of 1783 was so perfectly balanced it made it halfway to Inverness before being stopped by a startled pony. That cheese was known as the Grey Galloper, and apparently had a distinctive crack that made a whistling sound as it flew. You get to know the names. We Crumble, Old Yeller, the Mad Dunlop, Heather Bell, Splitty Macwheel, each with its own backstory, usually involving a sheepdog, a misdelivery, or a particularly chaotic christening. Cheese blessing rituals vary by village. In some places, they'd rub the wheel with butter infused with heather and honey. In others, it might be dusted with flour and circled around the villages, wishing rock 3 times while an elder hummed a tune only she remembered. Here, they use peat smoke, a muttered toast in Gaelic, and a firm pat from the local cheese warden, a position elected each year based solely on who can carve a wedge the fastest without breaking the rind. You meet the current cheese warden, Moira. She's about 4'10" and wears a wool shawl so aggressively patterned it could qualify as visual camouflage in any rug shop. She lifts We Crumble like a sacred object, gives it a fond squint, and declares, "This one's got ambition." No one questions her. There's debate among food historians about what cheeses would actually survive this sort of abuse. Some argue the villagers likely chose low-moisture cheeses, dry, hard-rind rounds that wouldn't shatter on the first rock. Others insist it was part of the fun when a softer wheel split open mid-race, spraying curds into the eyes of the unsuspecting. And some believe the official, cheese might have been swapped out halfway down, with decoy cheeses rolled to confuse rival villages. One particularly spirited tale involves a dairy-mad clan in the 1600s who hollowed out their wheel and filled it with warm porridge, hoping the heat would propel it further. It didn't. It exploded halfway down the hill, covering spectators and breakfast. That wheel became legend, the porridge bomb of Dunlagan, and was memorialized in a badly rhymed ballad no one can quite finish. Tonight's cheese is humble in size, roughly the width of a hatbox and twice as heavy. You lift it briefly, with Moira's permission, and nearly dislocate something. The rind is sturdy, mottled with a soft bloom, and marked with faint ridges from the aging cloth. A careful sniffer might even detect notes of damp stone, old herbs, and faint regret. This is no supermarket cheddar. This is a wheel born to suffer, and then to be eaten. Because here's the fun twist: the cheese is not a trophy. It's a participant. And once it has done its duty, once it has hurtled, rolled, ricocheted, and finally settled somewhere near the tree-line, it's carried back up, scraped off, sliced, and shared among the crowd. A ritual feast. A sacred snack. One might call it an edible eulogy. And yes, it's eaten regardless of how many thistles it's rolled through. A little moss never hurt anyone. You think about this as Moira prepares the cheese for launch. She whispers to it, something soft and affectionate, like one might murmur to a dog or a mildly nervous chicken. She presses a finger to its center. A small child hands her a twig of gorse, which she tucks into the hay beside it. Someone strikes a bell, once then twice. That means it's nearly time. And still you're learning. Someone beside you is muttering that this year's cheese lacks the bounce of 1791's Golden Lady, which allegedly survived 6 races in a row. Another swears that 1810's winner, Big Mary's Moonwheel, was aged in a cave and polished with whiskey-soaked linen. Historians still argue whether this practice was common, or just one woman's particularly enthusiastic interpretation of flavor enhancement. You ask if the cheese ever cheats. Your question is met with slow blinks and one suspiciously long silence. Eventually, someone leans in and tells you about a family who trained their wheel in secret, rolling it down different slopes during the off-season, coaching it like a champion racehorse. It had a name, Thunderbutt, and a velocity that terrified small children. It won 3 years running. Then it vanished. Some say it retired. Others say it escaped into the woods and now rolls free, appearing at odd festivals across the land. You laugh, because this is ridiculous. But also, you're not entirely unconvinced. As twilight deepens and the crowd draws in, you realize the cheese is more than just a tool of chaos. It's a character in the drama. A celebrated, abused, beloved object that carries the weight of the community's joy, and sometimes their mud-covered boot prints. And as we crumble, is carried to the top of the hill, blessed with the final swirl of smoke, and held aloft like some slightly fragrant hero, you feel yourself rooting for it. Not just to win, but to survive. You follow the procession up the hill, slow, uneven, and filled with the kind of solemn ceremony usually reserved for weddings or mildly inconvenient exorcisms. The cheese, we crumble, is carried in a handmade sling by 2 lanky teenagers who've clearly drawn the short straw. Their feet slip in the damp grass every 3rd step, and one of them mutters, "If it breaks, I'm leaving the country." Behind them walks Moira the cheese warden, holding a sprig of bog myrtle like a scepter, and behind her, the villagers trail up in loose pairs, carrying lanterns, cups, and something that smells suspiciously like fried parsnips. As you climb, the slope starts to feel more personal. You didn't notice how steep it was earlier, probably because your attention was fixed on not getting trampled by a rogue oat loaf. But now, with every upward step, your calves lodge their complaints in polite but pointed ways. You stop for a breather near a clump of gorse and notice an old wooden sign staked into the ground. Faded words read, "He who stumbles here shall stumble forever." Beneath that, a more recent scribble, "Unless ye land in a thistle patch, then you'll just itch." Locals believe the hill has moods. On foggy days, it's forgiving. On windy days, it's mischievous. And on festival nights like this, it's considered a wee bit hungry, which no one bothers to explain. You ask a nearby lad what that means. He shrugs and says, "Hill likes drama." You nod solemnly. That tracks. At the top, there's a small platform made from centuries-old planks and reinforced with hope. From up here, you can see the entire village tucked between the hills like a woolen blanket laid across the glen. Smoke curls from chimneys, and faint music drifts upward, a fiddler warming up, a drum tapped lazily, like a heartbeat. The cheese is set down carefully on a flat rock known locally as the Rolling Stone. You don't make the joke. Everyone else already has. This stone has allegedly launched every cheese since the 1600s, though historians still argue whether the current rock is the original, or a faithful cousin, swapped in after the Great Lichen Incident of 1862. Either way, the stone is cracked, lopsided, and oddly comforting. Like the cheese, it has seen things. Moira steps forward with her ceremonial wooden spoon, carved with thistle, trout, and a slightly unflattering portrait of herself, and taps the rind 3 times. The sound echoes gently in the stillness. "Tonight," she says, "we crumbles shall race the slope. If it returns whole, we feast. If it splits, we also feast, but with a bit more chewing." The crowd chuckles. Someone mutters, "Aye, she's in good form tonight." Another replies, "Better than the cheese, at least." The ritual continues. A pinch of oat flour is sprinkled on the ground for traction luck, and a small square of cheesecloth is tied around Moira's wrist in memory of a cheese lost to the bog in 1719. That wheel, named Silent Bessie, allegedly disappeared without a splash, never to be found again. Some say she haunts the marshes, whispering recipes to lost travelers. You try not to think about it. A dog barks in the distance. 3 crows flap across the horizon. Someone starts humming Loch Lomond under their breath, as if to settle the hill's nerves. Then, without warning, a gust of wind rolls across the hilltop, lifting your scarf and sending a tumble of leaves across the platform. The cheese wobbles slightly in its cradle. A small girl gasps. "It's ready," she whispers. And sure enough, the mood shifts. The crowd below quiets. The music fades. You feel a tremble under your boots, not seismic, more like anticipation stretching its limbs. Moira gives the wheel a final look. She crouches, murmurs something private to it, then stands. She gestures to the teens. "Brace it." They step forward, gently steadying the cheese against a carved wooden wedge. Moira lifts her spoon again. "On the count of 3. Your breath catches. 1. Somewhere, a bagpipe squeals a nervous note. 2. You lean slightly forward. The hill seems to lean back. 3. And the wedge is kicked away. We crumble, hesitates, just for a blink, then tilts, rolls, and launches. This one's got speed. You can feel it instantly. The wheel doesn't just bounce, it hops, like it's actively trying to dodge obstacles. It picks up momentum with a reckless joy, zigzagging wildly but never quite tipping over. The crowd erupts. Someone shouts, "Go on, ye noble round beast!" Another screams, "Take no prisoners!" You and the other runners take off in its wake, this time slightly more cautious. The hill is slick, littered with stomped earth and discarded scarf ends. One lad rolls an ankle in the first 10 yards and is carried off by a very sympathetic sheep. Not part of the plan, but surprisingly effective. As you chase, the air whistles past your ears. Your arms flail, your legs wobble, and every instinct tells you this is a terrible idea, which it is. But it's also exhilarating. Halfway down, we crumble, takes a dramatic bounce, flies at least 4 feet into the air, and lands with a satisfying thud. A teenager tries to intercept it, trips over a bootlace, and face plants directly into an old molehill. He doesn't seem to mind. The wheel curves left, hard left, toward a narrow trench carved by years of rain and goats. For a moment, it looks like it might disappear entirely. But no. We crumble, rights itself with a wobble and roars forward, tumbling end over end in a triumphant, dizzy blur. You make it to the bottom just in time to see it hit the mossy patch near the standing stone and settle into a graceful, sideways slump. Whole. Intact. Glorious. The crowd cheers. The runners collapse. Somewhere, someone plays a celebratory jig on a penny whistle. You stagger toward the wheel, brushing grass from your coat, your knees aching in places you didn't know had joints. Moira scoops up the cheese, holds it aloft, and shouts, "She lives!" A toast is made, warm cider passed in a communal cup, spiced with cloves and possibly thyme, and the cheese is placed reverently on a stone slab to rest before slicing. A man beside you claps your back. "Fastest roll since the wet year," he says. You nod, unsure what year that was, but deeply certain it was indeed wet. You're starting to understand something vital here. This isn't really about the cheese. It's about the chase. The chaos. The shared absurdity of watching people willingly fling themselves downhill after a wheel of fermented milk. And tomorrow, bruises and all, they'll do it again. Later that night, after the cider has been passed, the cheese sliced, and the hill has gone quiet, you find yourself in the village hall. The walls are timber-framed and decorated with old banners and cracked wooden shields from competitions long past. One bears a painted cheese with tiny wings. Another simply reads, "Fastest by furlong, 1757. You assume that was either the cheese, or a rather speedy farmer. Everyone's inside now. The air smells of peat smoke, damp wool, and melting wax. A gentle murmur fills the room, people chatting in low tones, a baby gurgling near the hearth, someone lazily tuning a fiddle. Plates are being passed, thick wedges of bread, soft rounds of cheese that, thankfully, did not go tumbling earlier, and something that tastes suspiciously like turnip but tries its best not to be. You sit near the fire, your knees aching from the roll, and listen. Because this is where the real stories are told. They call it the Hall of Slopes, though it's just the village hall with slightly better lighting. This is where they recount the greatest cheese rolls in village history, not the ones that were necessarily fastest or smoothest, but the ones that were the most entertaining. And occasionally, mildly cursed. The current speaker is a man named Fergus, whose beard appears to have its own opinions and may be older than he is. He's halfway through a tale about a cheese roll in 1824, during what he claims was the foggiest evening in recorded Scottish history, when even the sheep got lost. According to him, that year's wheel, Bridget the Bold, veered so far off course it ended up being retrieved 3 days later in the neighboring village of Drumbeg, where it had apparently been adopted by a confused baker and renamed the Rolling Loaf. The baker refused to return it. There was a trial. The cheese was eventually eaten as evidence. Historians still argue whether that counts as a win for Drumbeg, Fergus says, sipping from a chipped mug. But everyone agrees the baker got off too easy. A round of nodding follows. Another story involves Muckle Gouda, the only cheese in village memory to knock out 3 runners and an unfortunate goat. Its rind, allegedly reinforced with beeswax and grit, ricocheted so hard off a tree stump that it hit a bystander square in the chest, who later claimed to have seen his entire life flash before his eyes, including events that hadn't happened yet. But not all the stories are of chaos and injuries. Some are oddly gentle. There's the tale of Cloverwheel, a cheese so fragrant and beautifully shaped that no one wanted to roll it. Instead, they paraded it through the village on a cart decorated with ferns and fairy lights, well, oil lanterns, but close enough. When the time came to release it down the hill, the entire crowd simultaneously said, "Ach, let's not," and instead placed it on a pedestal where it stayed for 17 days before finally being eaten in tiny ceremonial bites. One woman across the room pipes up, "My grand swore Cloverwheel spoke to her in her dreams." This is met with a few raised eyebrows and one soft exhale of disbelief. Still, no one denies her. Every village has its cheese whisperer, after all. There's also a chalkboard near the fire, faded but legible, listing historical record holders: longest roll, 145 yards, most airborne time, 5.6 seconds, most unpredictable trajectory, simply labeled Chaotic Evil, and best wheel name, undisputed, Bree once. You spend the next hour sipping something warm and suspiciously herbal, half listening as the room ebbs and flows around you. A child runs past wearing a homemade cheese hat. Someone is sketching a new course map on a napkin. The older crowd in the corner is arguing over whether the cheese of 1908 was hollow or merely possessed. The fire crackles softly. Outside, rain begins to fall in that misty, non-committal way it does in this part of the Highlands. You can hear it against the shutters, soft, steady, rhythmic. Someone begins singing an old lullaby in Gaelic, barely louder than a whisper. No one joins in. They just listen. And it hits you, this entire tradition, rolling a wheel of cheese down a hill, is ridiculous. Completely, irredeemably absurd. And yet, within that absurdity is something quietly magical. Because it brings everyone together. The thrill of the chase. The bruises earned in good fun. The legends passed down like heirlooms, growing stranger with each telling. The cheese, always the cheese, rolling ahead like a little edible myth. You think back to earlier, running, sliding, laughing, nearly colliding with a man in tartan leggings who insisted he was drafting the cheese's slipstream. And you realize, you're part of this now. A small part, perhaps, but part nonetheless. Your muddy boots are proof. So is the fleck of rind still stuck to your coat. You take another sip of your herbal mystery drink. It tastes of time, honey, and possibly ambition. Someone offers you another slice of We Crumble, now resting proudly on a carved board labeled Survivor 2025. You bite in. It's tangy, nutty, surprisingly complex, and yes, a little grassy. But mostly, it tastes like victory. You wake the next morning to the gentle creak of wooden shutters and the faint aroma of peat smoke curling under the door. Your knees object immediately. Apparently, your enthusiastic sprint down a damp hill after a runaway cheese wheel has been fully processed and professionally critiqued by your joints overnight. Every step now feels like a polite protest from your lower half. But the ache is softened by the kind of quiet that only follows a village celebration. No rush, no obligations. Just birdsong, a breeze, and the echo of 100 cheese wheels past. Downstairs, your host, Mrs. Dalekey, hands you a bowl of porridge so thick it might qualify as a foundation material. It's topped with brown sugar, cream, and something suspiciously crunchy. To keep your teeth interested, she says with a wink. You don't ask questions. Over breakfast, she tells you about the mid-row recovery walk. Apparently, it's customary for participants of the cheese race to take a slow, winding stroll through the meadows the next day, both to walk off the soreness and to retell key moments from the previous night's debacle. A way to stretch the limbs and the truth at the same time, she says. You accept the invitation, and soon you're walking a worn footpath with a handful of other villagers, including one man who insists he actually caught We Crumble midair. Everyone lets him believe it. The path leads past stone walls, gnarled trees, and the occasional sheep who, you suspect, has seen things. You pause beside a small wooden signpost that reads, Cairn of the Curds. A stone pile marks the spot where, allegedly, the very first cheese wheel was buried after splitting into perfect quarters on landing. A sign from the dairy gods, or so the legend goes. There's a bundle of fresh wildflowers resting on top. Someone still pays their respects. As you walk, the villagers begin pointing out landmarks tied to famous roles. That's where Angus fell headfirst into a molehill and claimed to have invented a new form of travel. Over there's the stump that ended poor Macwheely's 12-year winning streak. And that rock? Cursed. The 1893 cheese hit it, bounced clean off, and rolled straight into the minister's bath. He never forgave it. These anecdotes come fast and fondly, like verbal breadcrumbs left behind by generations of rolling enthusiasts. You're struck by how vividly the past clings to the landscape here, not through statues or plaques, but through jokes, half-true tales, and lovingly misremembered details. The hill isn't just a hill, it's a memory palace for cheese-based heroism. Midway through the walk, you come upon a little museum. It's technically just someone's converted shed, but inside are shelves of old photographs, retired wheels preserved in wax, and an entire corner devoted to historical cheese costumes, some involving bells, others suspicious amounts of fringe. A hand-drawn map on the wall tracks the great diversions, years when the course had to be changed due to floods, sheep rebellions, or, in one case, a spontaneous wedding that occurred mid-slope. The bride wore linen, the caption reads, and dodged the cheese like a Highland ninja. You even find a faded newspaper clipping pinned behind glass. Cheese rolling declared legitimate sport, sort of. Dated 1973, complete with a blurry photo of a man triumphantly hoisting what might be a cheddar or a very determined rock. Outside the museum shed, someone offers you a cup of something warm, calling it runner's tea. It tastes like brambles, mint, and stubbornness. You sit in the grass, tea in hand, and realize this is more than just a local novelty. The cheese rolling ritual, silly though it may seem, binds the community across generations. It's not just an annual event. It's a through line. A shared, rolling joke that keeps everyone moving forward together. There's even talk, as you overhear, of a cheese air program, where long-standing participants pass down their favorite wheels, along with notes, superstitions, and carefully oiled cheese-handling gloves. A good wheel chooses its chaser, one woman says, nodding solemnly. Historians still argue whether these cheese dynasties actually existed or if they were invented by local families looking for a way to keep the grandkids interested. Regardless, every runner here seems to know who chased what, and which wheel was lucky, haunted, or suspiciously fast. The afternoon wears on, and you head back toward the village with your group. A breeze picks up, brushing through the wild grasses, and a nearby crow caws like it's auditioning for a gothic musical. One of the younger villagers turns to you suddenly and says, "Think you'll run next year?" You consider it. The bruises. The breathless, joyful sprint. The taste of cider and success. The absurdity. The thrill. You smile. You say. I reckon I might. Back in the village proper, something unusual catches your eye. Tucked beside the bakery, just beneath a faded sign carved in looping Celtic script, is a squat building with a heavy, rusted lock and a notice pinned crookedly on the door. It reads quite plainly, "Cheese Jail. Inquire within." You do. Moments later, a wiry man in a vest 2 sizes too small and boots older than most of the furniture opens the door. He introduces himself as Malky, head warden of the wheel, and with no further preamble, gestures you inside. The cheese jail, as it turns out, is less a place of incarceration and more a museum of misbehavior. This is where they keep the so-called criminal cheeses, the wheels that defied the rules, caused havoc, or developed reputations too colorful to allow back on the hill. Displayed in dusty glass cases and padded crates are wheels with names like Split Decision, a double Gloucester that cracked in 2 mid-roll, causing both halves to finish in separate villages, igniting a brief but passionate border dispute. The Midnight Curdlip, rolled down the hill under cover of darkness in 1968 by pranksters. It collided with the local constable's bicycle. The cheese was later acquitted. The constable was not. Will.i.am Wallace, banned after allegedly attempting to liberate itself mid-run and knock over a judge. The tales grow increasingly improbable, and yet here they are, preserved like ancient relics. You peer into a case labeled "Wheels that were too fast," containing aerodynamic blueprints, wax samples, and one suspiciously smooth Gouda with what appear to be roller skate bearings embedded in its rind. Historians still argue whether that one ever actually raced, Malky says, tapping the glass. But its spirit still haunts the track. In a back corner, you find a cheese so moldy it's turned black-green and seems to pulse slightly when you're not looking at it. Malky lowers his voice. That's the spoiler. Rolled once in '89. Nobody finished. Everyone went home sick. The village dogs never barked since. He offers you a biscuit from a tin labeled, "In case of cheese-based emergency." You politely decline. While you marvel at the absurdity, Malky explains that the cheese jail also serves a functional purpose. Any wheel deemed unfit for competition, whether for being too unbalanced, improperly aged, or simply full of itself, is sent here for contemplation. There's even a plaque above the door. Let ye who is without wobble cast the first wheel. The concept of cheese justice, you realize, is taken very seriously. Before you leave, Malky offers to show you the wheel registry, a ledger thicker than a Highland cow, filled with names, dates, measurements, and little annotations like tumbled admirably, hit 4 trees and still smiled, retired due to rind fatigue, suspected witchcraft, investigation ongoing. You flip to the last few pages and see an entry for we crumble, the very wheel you watched fly down the hill yesterday. Someone's already scribbled. Cheerful bounce, lovely aroma, promising rookie. You smile at that. As you step back into the open air, your eyes adjusting to the overcast light, you notice just how much cheese is built into the rhythm of this place. Not just in the games, but in the language, the landmarks, even the relationships. A couple strolls past, arm in arm, debating whether their first date was before or after the year of the rolling bride. A child skips by humming a song that rhymes Stilton with Milton and tilted down the Hilton. There's a quiet pride here. Not in grandeur or fame, but in tradition. In taking something silly and building a whole village heartbeat around it. That evening you sit in the pub, the wobbly rind, and watch the locals unwind. The bar serves a drink called Churner's Regret, which tastes of vanilla, nutmeg, and ambition, and another called Forcheese Fling, which arrives in a mug roughly the size of a bucket. You opt for a safer cider. Someone brings out a fiddle, and soon the place is full of music, not raucous, but toe-tapping, shoulder-swaying, warm. A few patrons even dance in the cramped space, hands held high, feet keeping just enough rhythm to count. You strike up a conversation with an older man who introduces himself as Ian, self-declared cheese philosopher. His insights range from the poetic, a good roll mirrors life, it's all downhill, but worth chasing, to the abstract, is the cheese chasing you, or are you chasing it? He also believes cheeses can feel fear. You're not sure you disagree. Eventually, the music fades, the crowd thins, and the barkeep turns the sign to closed-ish. You step out into the night, belly full, cheeks flushed, brains slightly spinning from cider and story. The sky is that inky Highland black, scattered with stars so sharp they look like pinholes poked through velvet. You can still hear the faint whistle of wind over the hill. Somewhere, an owl calls. Somewhere else, a cheese dreams of next year's race. And as you walk back toward your guest house, boots crunching lightly over gravel, you glance once over your shoulder. The hill stands dark and quiet now, but you imagine it, alive with movement, cheese and chaser tumbling side by side, laughter echoing down the slope. You'll be there again. You know it. And next time, maybe, just maybe, you'll catch it. You're up early the next morning, early enough that dew still clings stubbornly to each blade of grass, and the crows haven't yet decided whether they're awake or just annoyed. The hill, in this light, looks gentler, like it's tired too, recovering from all that rolling chaos. But your host, Mrs. Dalekey, has a plan. You can't say you've really visited if you haven't seen the cheese stone, she declares, handing you a thermos of something thick and tan and whispering, "Don't ask," when you sniff it. The cheese stone, she explains, is a monolithic lump of granite halfway up the older of the 2 village hills. Not used for rolling anymore. It's too steep and has a knack for sending wheels directly into the river. But the cheese stone predates the sport by centuries. Some say it gave birth to the first roll, she adds, very seriously. Others say it just looks a bit like a cheese. And sure enough, when you reach it, after a slippery climb involving one questionable rope and several helpful nettles, you find yourself face to face with a great round boulder, flat-topped, deeply ridged, faintly yellowed by lichen. It does, in fact, resemble a wheel of hard cheese the size of a bath. Carved into its side is a series of symbols, part ugam, part guesswork, all mysterious. Locals believe the cheese stone was a druidic altar. Others think it was a grinding table. One slightly tipsy folklorist claims it's Scotland's oldest cheese board. Historians still argue whether the cheese stone had anything to do with food at all, but nobody's managed to disprove its dairy connection. After all, It's tradition to place a wedge of cheese on top of it each spring. So the hill knows we're serious. This morning, there's a tiny offering, a slice of brie, half melted in the sun. Nearby, a crow hops in expectantly. You let it have a nibble. Everyone deserves a ritual snack. From here, you can see both the modern race slope and the curling lanes beyond the village, the long, straight strip of flattened grass where, come winter, the villagers play a sleepy version of curling using frozen cheese wheels. Slide and pray, it's called. You make a mental note to come back in January, wearing very thick socks. As you descend, you pass a group of schoolchildren carrying satchels and sketch pads. Their teacher waves, then calls out, "We're learning about ancient cheese today." They head toward the cheese stone, some already arguing about whether Swiss or cheddar rolls faster. Back in the village center, preparations are underway for the Cheese Legacy Fair, a post-race market/festival where cheese artisans, wheelwrights, and assorted enthusiasts show off their wares. Booths are popping up with names like Rind and Reckless, custom-painted cheese wheels, Curd of the Highlands, storytelling and ballads about famous rolls. Way to go! A stall exclusively selling postcards of airborne cheese. You stop by a booth where a woman is carving names into wooden cheese-chasing medals. She offers you one blank to engrave your own legacy. You write somewhat bashfully, tumbled but got up. A soft brass band begins tuning up nearby, clearly amateur, but charming. They rehearse the village anthem, which includes lyrics such as, "Oh roll, ye curds of destiny, slash down yon slippy slope." You're handed a tasting plate, and try a series of heritage cheeses with names like Peat Whisper, Blue Murmuration, and the ominous Gruff of Night. That last one smells like an old boot in a thunderstorm but tastes oddly nostalgic. Then you stumble upon a curious corner of the fair, a tent marked Ancient Tactics and Cheese Lore. Inside, a group of self-described cheese strategists has gathered to debate competitive approaches from the past. Charts are unfurled. Arrows point to cheese trajectory sketches. One man insists that the ideal runner's form is a blend of goose and goat, while another counters that gravity, not footwork, wins the race. There's a small diorama recreating the legendary triple roll of 1812, in which 3 cheeses tied for first place and all married into rival families. One attendee mutters, "Still affects voting patterns." A quiet old woman in the corner claims to possess the prophecy of the last cheese, which she will only read aloud under the light of a full moon and a wedge of Roquefort. You decide to leave her be. Near the exit, you find a handwritten timeline titled, "Role Models, Cheese Through the Ages." It tracks cheese-chasing heroes from medieval times to present day, each illustrated in loving, if questionably accurate, sketches. One woman in 1750 supposedly chased a cheese while 8 months pregnant, and gave birth right at the finish line. The baby was named Brie. Of course she was. You make your way back toward the village square just as the afternoon light shifts golden and sleepy. Children run past you wearing cardboard cheese helmets, yelling the names of their favorite wheels like battle cries. A small dog, possibly named Cheddar Bite, barks encouragingly. You pause to soak in the atmosphere. Somewhere between ritual and farce, this place has turned rolling dairy into legacy. Each booth, each hill, each cracked cheese rind feels like a page from a big, crumbling family album that everyone here keeps adding to. And somehow, even as an outsider, you now feel like you're part of the story too, just another chapter in the long, rolling tale of a village that took something round and turned it into a world of its own. You wake the next day with a distinct impression that your dreams were narrated by cheese wheels. They tumbled through your mind all night, some majestic, others confused, one inexplicably singing opera. Blame it on the gruff of night. Today, though, your itinerary involves something quieter, a visit to the cheese school, a 2-room building near the edge of the village, perched between a field of grazing sheep and an inexplicably enormous sundial that tells time in cheddar segments. The school's door creaks open as you approach, revealing a chalkboard covered in curling script. Lesson: The Art of the Chase, Strategy, Footwear, and Bruise Management. A bell rings. Small feet shuffle. Children spill inside, followed by a woman with short gray curls and a cardigan shaped vaguely like a wheel. She introduces herself as Miss McFarlane. Retired chaser. 8-time winner. 2-time wall crasher. Welcome. She begins the lesson by asking the class, "What's the first thing you do before a race?" A hand shoots up. "Kiss the wheel." Another. "Count your teeth now, so you know what's missing later." Miss McFarlane laughs. "Yes, but also stretch." You're ushered to a small bench at the back, where you become something of a novelty, an adult in cheese school. A child leans over and whispers, "We're doing braking techniques today. I'm terrible at it. I just sort of scream." The blackboard lecture is simple, sweet, and incredibly sincere. You learn that there are two dominant cheese-chasing styles, the controlled chaos, where the chaser attempts graceful tumbling with practiced foot rolls, and the ragdoll redemption, in which survival is the only goal. A diagram of the hill is tacked up, complete with terrain notes. Pothole of destiny, rabbit's protest mound, and the infamous moss that betrayed. As Miss McFarlane speaks, she weaves in real village history. You hear about a grandmother who entered on a dare and made it halfway before gently sitting down, deciding, "This is enough chasing for me." The cheese wheel that veered into a wedding party, knocking the groom's hat into the punch bowl. The marriage survived, the hat did not. A monk in the 12th century who supposedly tried to baptize the cheese mid-run and was instead rolled into a barrel of mead. Historians still argue whether that last story has any basis in fact. Miss McFarlane notes. But we keep it in the syllabus anyway. It's educational. Next comes footwear theory, taught by a wiry gentleman in corduroy trousers who appears to be mostly knee. He brings out a battered suitcase and lays out its contents like holy relics. Worn-down boots with nails hammered into the soles for grip. Slippers. For daring downhill dancers. A single galoche labeled, "The one that survived." Each pair tells a story. One boot has a chunk missing from what he calls the Great Splat of '74. Another, impossibly intact, belonged to a runner who never even touched the ground. Flew the whole way down. Not even gravity could catch him. The children take notes, with varying degrees of seriousness. One draws a cheese wheel with wings. Another writes, "Never wear flip-flops," in all caps. After the lesson, Miss McFarlane invites you to see the school's practice hill, a gentle slope behind the building, padded with straw and dotted with training cheeses, wooden wheels painted yellow, with little faces scribbled on them. One says, "Kevin." Another says, "Not today, gravity." You're encouraged, strongly, insistently, and with much clapping, to give it a try. So, naturally, you do. You line up at the top. A child counts down. 3, 2, cheese! And off Kevin goes, wobbling bravely. You follow, arms flailing, feet slipping, momentum laughing in your face. You don't roll so much as gently fold, like a human paper crane. The grass smells of earth and daisies. A sheep watches disapprovingly. You land in a heap, half laughing, half grassy. The kids cheer. You get a sticker that says, "I chased today." Back in the classroom, Miss McFarlane shows you the archive of cheese techniques, a shelf of handwritten manuals with titles like "Tumbles with Grace," "Wheel Watching for Beginners," and "Roll Like Nobody's Watching." There's even a debate journal called Curd Controversies, discussing everything from well diameter to whether eating your competitor's cheese counts as sabotage. Only if you do it mid-roll, one paper argues. As the school day winds down, the students form a circle and sing the local victory chant, a repetitive but oddly charming tune that mostly involves the phrase, "Roll and roll again," and some cheese-based rhymes. You hum along, deeply aware that you're now emotionally invested in a group of 8-year-olds and their imaginary cheese named Kevin. The bell rings. Backpacks swing. You step outside, the children waving goodbye with hands still smudged in chalk and cheese dust. As you walk back through the village, a few locals stop to ask how your chase went. Someone offers you a slice of celebration pie, dense, warm, filled with leeks and local cheddar. You accept, obviously. It dawns on you that this whole place is a kind of living museum, not in the stale, dusty way, but in a constantly updated, joy-infused loop. Every tumble, every chant, every wonky cheese drawing becomes part of the lore. And you, unexpectedly, are now part of it too. Later that evening, just as the sky begins to sip from its cup of twilight, you find yourself following a narrow path out of the village. Lanterns flicker on either side of the trail, their soft yellow glow swaying gently in the wind like lazy fireflies. You've been invited to the night roll, a less athletic, more ceremonial affair that takes place once a year and is mostly whispered about like it's part festival, part bedtime story. You're handed a lantern by a girl no taller than your elbow. She smiles solemnly and says, "Don't outrun your wheel. It gets offended." Right. You nod. Obviously. The night roll begins at the ancient upper slope, not the official race hill, but the original, steeper incline that borders the forest. It's too dangerous for daytime runs, but tonight, it serves a different purpose: tribute. Dozens of villagers have gathered. Some wear ceremonial robes made from patched tartan, others are in mismatched pajamas and rain boots. Someone's dog wears a glow-stick collar shaped like a wheel. You blend in immediately. At the top of the slope, old Mr. Grierson, the local keeper of the wheels, stands beside a crate filled with memorial cheeses, small wheels etched with names, events, or fondly remembered near misses. Each wheel represents someone or something lost in the past year: a farmer's last collie, a beloved pub, a retiring teacher's dignity after her cheese hit a tree. The tradition began long ago, when a particularly unlucky cheese rolled off course, vanished into the woods, and was never seen again. The village declared it a sign. Some cheeses roll on beyond us. A shrine was built. A ritual was born. One by one, participants step up, place a hand on their chosen wheel, and speak a memory. The cheese is then set gently on the hill, and, with only the help of gravity and good intentions, it begins its descent. There's no racing here. No chase. Just a quiet procession of cheese wheels rolling down into the dark, their paths lit by soft lantern glow, and accompanied by the occasional shout of, "Mind the stump!" As you stand there, breathing in the night air thick with damp leaves and candle wax, you begin to appreciate the unspoken poetry of the moment. This village, which once hurled wheels down a hill for sport, now sends them gently downhill as symbols of memory and passage. One woman releases a small wheel inscribed with the words, "For Charlie, who always burned the toast but never the cheese." It wobbles left, then veers right, settling into a patch of moss like it's found the perfect final resting spot. Another, marked with the initials, JMC, makes it all the way to the base of the slope before flipping twice and landing upright. The crowd murmurs respectfully. That's considered a good omen. You're offered a turn. You choose a wheel labeled only possibility. There's no backstory, it's a spare, a leftover, but the idea feels right. You hold it for a moment, warming the wood with your hands, then release it. The wheel rolls elegantly, confidently, before tripping over a root and landing on its side. A villager nearby claps softly. She's a graceful tumbler, that one. The ceremony ends not with applause, but with the tolling of a single bell. Everyone stands still for a moment, lanterns held high, and then slowly begins the walk back. There's no rush. No jostling. Just the quiet shuffle of feet and the occasional sleepy joke. As you trail behind the group, a young boy sidles up beside you. "Did you know," he says, "that one time, a cheese rolled so far it made it to the coast?" "Really?" "Well, almost. It got eaten by a badger, but the point is, it tried." You nod solemnly. Respect. Back in the village square, mugs of warm milk and barley tea are passed around. A few people break into a soft humming tune, part lullaby, part ode to wheels. Lyrics float gently into the air. "Roll on, little curd, into the dark / light as a bell, brave as a lark." You sip your drink, toes warming by a small fire pit, and take in the night. The fair booths are quiet now, tucked under canvas like sleeping oxen. The cheese school is dark, Kevin probably dreaming of wind resistance. The race hill looms in the distance, no longer a place of action but one of memory, lit faintly by moonlight and the lingering glow of earlier footsteps. Someone offers you a pillow made from wool and hay. You rest your head against it, marveling that this village, a place that could have clung to its quirks like a novelty, is instead steeped in its own rolling mythology, part comedy, part kinship. They've turned cheese chasing into something both hilarious and holy. You glance once more toward the forest edge where the night roll took place. The last of the memorial wheels has just finished its journey, nudging up against the tree stump with gentle finality. Even gravity, it seems, knows when to pause. Morning arrives softly, as if the village itself is reluctant to wake after the night roll. You find yourself wandering to the village square, where the air smells faintly of fresh bread, damp stone, and, curiously, mildly of cheddar. You remind yourself it's probably just your imagination. Or maybe it's not. Today, the village prepares for the cheese artisan fair, a slow, deliberate celebration of craftsmanship. Unlike the chaos of rolling, this event highlights the quieter side of cheese, its making, shaping, and the odd rituals that surround it. You must admit, you never expected cheese to have such a detailed personality, like it has moods, preferences, and a stubborn will of its own. Turns out it does. The fair is a patchwork of stalls under canvas canopies, each manned by a cheese maker who looks equal parts proud and mildly confused by the idea that anyone might find cheese interesting. You meander past tables adorned with wheels of every size and color, some pale and crumbly, others glossy and red-rind, and one suspiciously spotted with what appears to be moldy freckles. A gentleman named Dougal greets you with a warm smile and a, "Well, you're in for a treat." He's the village's longest-standing cheesemaker, with hands that look like they've wrestled more curds than most wrestle hay bales. He guides you to a vat of fresh milk warmed to just the right temperature. "Patience," he says, "is the real secret. And a little chat with the curds now and then doesn't hurt." You raise an eyebrow, but Dougal is serious. He whispers something to the bubbling liquid, as if coaxing it to form just right. You watch as the milk thickens, curds and whey parting like a gentle tide. Historians still argue whether this practice of talking to cheese has any practical effect, or if it's just a comforting superstition passed down through generations. Regardless, the villagers swear by it. Dougal invites you to try your hand at molding the curds into a small wheel. Your fingers are clumsy but enthusiastic, pressing the sticky mass into a wooden mold carved with a delicate pattern, a thistle entwined with a rolling wheel. It feels oddly satisfying, like kneading dough but with a cheesier promise. Nearby, a woman named Elspeth demonstrates the art of aging cheese. She opens a cave-like cellar filled with shelves of aging wheels, their surfaces dusted with white bloom or rugged crust. The air is cool, earthy, and smells faintly of mushroom and old wood. Elspeth explains how humidity and temperature affect the cheese's texture and flavor. She pulls out a sample, slicing a thin piece with a delicate knife. You taste it, sharp, creamy, with a hint of wildflower honey. It's nothing like the prepackaged supermarket cheddar you once endured in college. At the same time, a smaller tent hosts a curious workshop on historic cheese tools. Inside, wooden presses, wire cutters, and archaic molds sit next to more unexpected objects. A cheese harp, yes, a harp, used to slice curds, and a set of brass bells once worn by the village's prize cows during the annual milk festival. A child nearby giggles while holding up a miniature wooden cheese wheel, carved as a lucky charm for rolling success. "My granny says it keeps the cheese spirits happy," she whispers conspiratorially. You stroll through the fair, sampling tiny cubes of cheeses infused with wild herbs, edible flowers, and a mysterious local fungus that gives a subtle, smoky tang. One vendor offers a cheese and honey toast, which you accept gratefully, marveling at how two simple ingredients can feel like a warm hug. You overhear a debate between two villagers about the origin of the cheese rolling itself. One insists it began as a practical competition among shepherds to test balance and speed, while the other argues it was a fertility ritual disguised in dairy. Historians still argue, you think, whether cheese rolling started as sport or sacred dance. As the day fades toward evening, you notice the fare gradually quieting, like a pot simmering down to a gentle bubble. You find a quiet bench near the fountain, where the water trickles like a soft percussion to the fading chatter. You reflect on the cheese, not just food, but a character woven deeply into this village's story. Its edges shaped by centuries of hands, its form inspired by hills, animals, and the people who dared to chase it. With your mouth still tingling from the last bite of herb-infused curd, you realize you've learned something oddly comforting. Sometimes, the slowest things, like aging cheese or a village tradition, hold the richest flavors. And sometimes, it takes a cheese wheel tumbling down a hill to remind you how delightfully unpredictable life can be. The morning sun streams lazily through your window, its warm fingers pulling you awake with the promise of gentle discovery. Today, you venture beyond the village, guided by a local historian named Fiona, whose passion for the area's hidden corners is as contagious as her laugh. She insists on taking you to a nearby forgotten settlement, a place where cheese rolling may have first taken root. The walk is easy, through fields dappled with wildflowers and the occasional curious sheep, their noses twitching at your passing. Fiona shares stories about the settlement's rise and fall. Once a thriving hub for dairy farmers, it was slowly abandoned as trade routes shifted and younger generations left for the cities. What remains now are stone foundations, weathered wooden beams, and the ghostly imprint of life lived in harmony with the land and their cheeses. You imagine the villagers long ago, carrying their wheels to the hilltops, challenging the elements and each other in a ritual both playful and profound. You stop at a moss-covered stone marked with faint carvings of rolling wheels and sheep, the earliest known symbol linked to the tradition. Fiona tells you that some archaeologists speculate this may have been a sacred site, where the first competitive rolling was both a contest and a prayer for good harvests. Historians still argue whether these carvings represent actual competitions or something more symbolic, a celestial dance of cheese and gravity. As you explore, you notice the earth beneath your feet feels soft and rich, the air filled with the scent of damp leaves and distant pine. The site seems to breathe with stories, silent but insistent. Nearby, a cluster of wild herbs grows, some of which are said to have been used in ancient cheese-making to add flavor or preserve the curds. Fiona plucks a sprig of thyme and offers it to you. The aroma is sharp yet comforting, like a whisper of the past. You pause to sit on a fallen log, feeling the weight of history settling softly around you. The landscape rolls gently toward the horizon, where the original cheese hill rises, its familiar silhouette against the sky. In this moment, the boundaries between past and present blur. You're not just a visitor, you're part of a continuing story, one that has rolled through generations like a cheese wheel chasing the wind. As you stand to leave, Fiona points out a small stone circle nearby, believed by some villagers to be an ancient gathering spot for celebrations, possibly linked to the first cheese rolling events. It's a quiet place, filled with soft light and the hum of insects. You wonder how many people stood here, waiting for the first cheese to tumble down the hill, hearts pounding in time with its roll. Walking back to the village, your mind is full of images, rolling wheels, ancient stones, and the endless dance between tradition and time. You realize that every roll, every chase, every tumble is a thread in a tapestry far richer than the cheese itself. And somehow, that thought makes the world feel just a little softer, a little more magical. The next day, you find yourself wandering into the village's cheese museum, a cozy little place tucked into a stone building with ivy crawling up its walls like it's trying to roll down itself. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of aged wood and old parchment, a perfect setting for stories that unfold slowly like a well-ripened cheddar. You begin at a display of ancient cheese-making tools, wooden molds, brass presses, and curious contraptions that look like they might double as medieval torture devices but are actually just for slicing. There's even a tiny cheese grater shaped like a miniature rolling wheel, which you can't help but admire for its craftsmanship and sheer impracticality. A placard nearby tells you that cheese-making has been practiced in this region since the Bronze Age, meaning people have been chasing curds for thousands of years. It's a comforting thought that while you struggle to stay awake, others centuries ago were rolling cheese down hills just to see what would happen. The museum curator, a cheerful woman named Mairead, tells you about one particularly quirky exhibit, the cheese letter collection. These are letters written by villagers across the decades, chronicling their experiences with cheese rolling, from tales of epic spills to philosophical musings on why cheese rolling might just be the universe's way of keeping life interesting. One letter, dated 1924, humorously laments, "I lost my hat and dignity to a runaway wheel. Both remain unaccounted for." You chuckle softly, imagining the chaos. Mairead explains how the letters reveal a side of village life often overlooked: the warmth, the camaraderie, and the gentle humor woven into tradition. "It's not just about cheese," she says. "It's about community." As you move through the exhibits, you come across a section dedicated to the evolution of cheese rolling itself. Photos from the early 1900s show villagers in heavy woolen clothes, clutching wheels with determined faces before racing down steep, muddy slopes. Contrast that with recent images where costumes, music, and laughter are just as important as the competition. Historians still argue whether cheese rolling originated as a practical test of agility or a celebratory ritual to honor the changing seasons. Either way, it's clear the tradition has morphed beautifully over time. One display shows an old film reel, grainy black and white footage of a cheese rolling race. You watch as the cheese wheel careens down a hill, followed by a flurry of legs and laughter. You're struck by the timeless joy and the slightly absurd bravery of those racers. As you leave the museum, clutching a small booklet about local cheese varieties, you feel a deeper connection to this village and its rolling heritage. The cheese isn't just food or sport, it's a storyteller, a keeper of secrets, and a gentle reminder that sometimes, the simplest things can carry the heaviest meanings. Outside, the village hums with quiet life. A breeze carries the distant sound of a bell and faintly, the memory of a rolling wheel chasing the horizon. You smile, ready to follow wherever the story rolls next. You wake up to the soft drizzle of rain tapping on your window, a gentle percussion that seems to slow time itself. Today is the village's cheese rolling school, a charming tradition where locals and visitors alike learn the art and etiquette of rolling cheese down the hill. It's less about competition here and more about the delicate balance between skill and luck. You join a small group gathered around Kevin, the self-proclaimed cheese sensei, who looks like he's been preparing for this role his entire life. Kevin's calm demeanor contrasts with his mischievous grin, promising lessons filled with both wisdom and gentle humor. "First rule," he says, holding up a small wheel. "Respect the cheese. It's got feelings, you know." You raise an eyebrow, already enjoying the gentle sarcasm as he demonstrates the proper grip. "You don't just toss it. You coax it." The group practices rolling the cheese gently across grassy knolls, learning to predict its wobble and speed. Kevin explains how even slight changes in the hill's slope or moisture can alter a wheel's path, turning a graceful roll into an unpredictable tumble. You try your hand, feeling the weight and texture of the wheel beneath your fingers. It's surprisingly soothing, like a slow dance between you and the cheese. Kevin shares a quirky tidbit. In the 1800s, some villagers reportedly used leather gloves to protect their hands, but these gloves sometimes caused more accidents because they reduced grip sensitivity. Historians still argue whether this was an innovation or just a lucky accident. After a few attempts, you start to sense a rhythm, the quiet joy of anticipation as the cheese begins its journey downhill. It's not about winning or losing here, but about connection, to the land, to the tradition, and to the moment. The lesson ends with a friendly contest where everyone rolls their wheels one last time. Laughter bubbles up as wheels veer wildly or slide perfectly into marked targets. You cheer for a small wheel that spins in place like it's deciding where to go next. Kevin wraps up with a reminder. Cheese rolling isn't just a sport. It's a story, told wheel by wheel. As you leave the school, the rain has slowed to a drizzle, and the village feels wrapped in a soft, misty blanket. You carry with you not just the memory of the day but a newfound appreciation for the delicate art hidden in what once seemed a simple, silly tradition. In this village, even cheese teaches patience, humor, and grace. The evening settles in with a gentle hush, and the village prepares for a quieter tradition, the cheese rolling feast. It's a slow, communal celebration where stories are shared over hearty food, and the day's excitement mellows into a warm, glowing comfort. You find yourself invited to a long wooden table beneath strings of soft lanterns, their light flickering like fireflies caught in a gentle breeze. The feast features dishes made with local cheeses, some familiar, others delightfully strange. There's a creamy blue cheese tart, its tang softened by honey drizzled over the top, and a dense oat bread dotted with sharp shards of aged cheddar. You try a slice of mild hill cheese, named after the very slopes where the rolling takes place. It's buttery with a whisper of earthiness, like tasting the landscape itself. Around you, villagers lean back, their faces relaxed and animated as they share tales from past rolling seasons. You listen to an elderly man recounting a particularly clumsy chase, where a cheese wheel tumbled off course and somehow ended up in the village bakery's dough, a tale told with such warmth it feels like a family legend. Someone mentions the peculiar tradition of awarding the Cheese Whisperer, a title given to the person deemed most in tune with the spirit of the cheese that year. It's a gentle honor, part jest, part reverence, and entirely part of the village's charm. Historians still argue whether this title originated from genuine superstition or playful village rivalry, but the role remains a beloved part of the festivities. As the feast continues, the conversation drifts to the odd laws still on the books, rules about cheese rolling that date back centuries. For instance, one law forbids rolling any cheese on Sundays, to honor the Sabbath with calm rather than chaos. Another declares that anyone caught deliberately sabotaging a wheel must buy a round of cheese for the entire village. You chuckle, imagining the mild mischief that must have inspired such rules. Between bites, you notice the sky deepening to a velvet blue, stars beginning to twinkle like tiny wheels rolling across the night. The lanterns flicker, the laughter softens, and a lull descends over the table. You feel a quiet gratitude for this village, for its traditions, and for the strange, wonderful way cheese has woven itself into the fabric of life here. The feast ends with a soft toast to the cheese that rolls us together, and the stories that never end. You sip your cider, feeling a gentle warmth spread through you, a perfect companion to the fading light and soft night sounds. Dawn breaks quietly over the village, casting a pale gold light that feels like a gentle invitation to slow down and savor the moment. As you wander through the now peaceful streets, you notice how the echoes of cheese rolling linger, in the worn stones, the soft grass on the hill, and the easy smiles of the villagers you've come to know. You find a quiet spot near the hill's crest, sitting where countless feet have rested before you. The air is cool and carries the faintest hint of dew and wild thyme. Here, you take a deep breath, letting the calm settle deep inside. You think back to the many layers you've uncovered, the ancient settlements and carvings, the crafts and rituals of cheese making, the playful competitions, and the gentle stories shared by the fireside. Each piece has added a new texture to the tapestry, weaving a picture not just of cheese rolling, but of a community bound by tradition, humor, and an enduring love for the simple joys of life. Historians still argue about the exact origins of cheese rolling, whether it began as a rite of passage, a celebration of the seasons, or just a clever way to pass a rainy afternoon. Perhaps the truth is as fluid as the curds and whey themselves, shaped by time and told differently by every generation. As the sun climbs higher, you close your eyes and imagine the wheel of cheese, smooth and round, setting off on its endless journey downhill, sometimes steady, sometimes wild, but always moving forward. It's a reminder that life, much like cheese rolling, is a balance of control and letting go. You smile softly, feeling the peaceful rhythm of the village seep into your bones. Here, where cheese rolls and stories flow, you've found a quiet refuge, a place where history isn't just remembered, but gently lived. And as you rise to leave, the hill seems to whisper one last invitation: roll on, and carry your stories with you. Slowly now, let your mind drift with the gentle sway of rolling hills and quiet village nights. Picture the soft rustle of grass, the warm glow of lanterns, and the comforting scent of aged cheese mingling with fresh air. Imagine the laughter fading to a whisper, the stories settling like dust motes in a sunbeam. You've traveled through centuries and traditions, and now it's time to rest. Let the calm wash over you, each breath softer than the last. Know that wherever you go, these rolling tales will follow, slow, steady, and soothing. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let your thoughts roll gently into dreams.